got a little talk I give on called the God's Formula for Fulfillment. And it has 4 words in it. Each begins with the letter D. The first word, or first phrase is, discover your gift. According to 2 Peter 4:10, we've all been given a gift. There are only 18 mentioned in the Bible, but 3 chapters have sections on the gifts and the way they're to be used. I like the one in Romans the best. It says, if this is your gift, get with it. If this is your gift, get with it. I think it's a good admonition. Whatever your gift is, get with it. So the first phrase from the word is discover your gifts. Now I want to tell you how I discovered my gifts. In my early 40s, I was not happy with my life and what I was producing. So I did several things. I went to a seminar in the University of Wisconsin. I bought a set of tapes, cost me $500. I bought a little book for 98 cents called Cybernetics, and I learned a lot from those books. Now the first thing I learned is that 90% of us have a erroneous view of who we are and what our gifts are. There are many tests, you've probably taken them. But what I did, I took my 3 closest friends who we had impacted each other's lives for more than a year. And I said, how do I come across to you? What's good and what's bad? To make it easy, put it in the terms of strengths and weaknesses. They didn't want to do it. So I said, well, how about doing it anonymously? Just to take a 5 to 7 card and write it out. We'll give it to a secretary, and she'll shuffle the cards and type it out and give it to me. So she did. I was leaving the office, and she handed it to me at the window, and I put it down on the seat. As soon as I got out on the straightaway, I began to look at it. Naturally, I looked at the weaknesses first. And my blood pressure went up about 50 points real quick. And my reaction was, who do these people think they are judging me like that anyway? But as I settled down a little bit, I wanted to know where they were unanimous on both the strengths and weaknesses. And I said, now, these men know me, they love me, they have no reason not to be objective, you know. They must be right. I must be wrong. So, about a month or so before I did this, I'd made a list of what I thought were my strengths and weaknesses. Then I compared them side to side and got the shock of my life. What I'd listed as a primary strength, all 3 of them said is a primary weakness. 2 of the things that I'd listed as weaknesses, they listed as primary strength. So I accepted that they were right, I was wrong. It was very liberating to be able to, from that point on, to express my personality through my strengths, not my weaknesses. The book I mentioned I bought for 98 cents, Dr. Maxwell Maltz, was a cosmetic surgeon, and he could repair a major defect without leaving even a scar. But after he fixed somebody up, he found out they still acted rejected. So he said, the personality has a face, and it requires surgery. And he's written several books on the self-image, mainly about the erroneous things that concept they have of themselves. There's some humorous things to this. In one of our training programs at the Navigators at Glen Erie, we had a British trainee, and he liked to do skits and play the guitar. So he would come out to do a skit and have boots, an umbrella, like a typical Englishman, and strum the guitar. He liked westerns, and not being a westerner, he didn't know the difference between a dogie and a doggy. He misplaced that. So as he would sing, he would like he was stroking the dog and said, "Get along, little doggy, get along." And it was so humorous that the rafters would shake with the laughter. He thought he was a great entertainer. He didn't realize they were laughing at him, not as his humor. So it was that prompted me. I said, now, I know people like that. I can't find that I'm any exception. So that's the reason I went to these men, to see what they thought and where I was mistaken. So as I said, that was very liberating. The first thing is discover your gifts. Now the second D stands for dedicate your gift. I think the best illustration of this is Billy Graham. He was offered $1 million a year to go on late night TV opposite Jack Paar. He turned it down. But as CBS made him this offer, he said, what would I talk about? And they said, anything you want. They recognized that he had the gift of connecting with people at all levels. But he turned it down. I think he's glad he did. But for the next 30 years, he was listed as, in Times, 10 most admired people in the world for 30 years. That's the recognition he got. He could have had any job he wanted in Hollywood. He's the only evangelist I know that has a star in the Walk of Fame, but he has a star there. He also could have been a Shakespearean actor on Broadway, but he turned that down. He dedicated his life to his gift to preaching the gospel. So the second D was dedicate your gift to a higher cause than yourself. There are many suicides among those who use their gift for personal fame and fortune. It's never intended that be used for that purpose. Well, the third is to develop your gift to the maximum. I don't claim to be a prophet, but I can tell you here tonight that probably your obituary, the length of your obituary, will be relative to how well you developed your gift. And what your tombstone says will be relative to how you developed your gift. If you develop it, you've got something to pass on to the next generation. I think my favorite person along this line is Dr. Ben Carson. I followed his career long before he got into politics. And he had the reputation of being the greatest brain surgeon in the world. He had a strong testimony, and people came all over the world to learn about what he knew about brain surgery. Then he would give their testimony. So when I say develop your gift, if you're the top in your profession, people will come to you. I often say that I like Old Testament evangelism better than New Testament evangelism, because God promised his people, if you'll obey me, I will make you so attractive that the pagans will come over and say, how do we get in on this blessing? And you can tell them how about God. So the better you develop your gift, the more you attract people that will come to you. You don't have to go to them. That's what I call Old Testament evangelism. Now the fourth word is deploy your gift. That's a military word. It means get into action with it. I read a statement a while back that said, everything that's ever been created has been created for a purpose. To the degree that which has been created is fulfilling the purpose for which it was created, it is at that point of time perfect. When we're doing what God made us to do, well, the situation is perfect at that time. I have a secular version of this, which I give to various people, including the Army. I was talking to a battalion of soldiers that was getting ready to deploy overseas. And came to the end, I just asked the question, who do you think is the most fulfilled person in this battalion? I didn't get much of an answer. So I said, well, if I was trying to decide, it would be a toss-up between the chaplain and the commanding officer. Both of them have discovered their gift. They have dedicated their gift. They've developed their gift. And they can't wait to get overseas and start using their gift in what they're trained for and know how to do. I spoke at a stand-up mic. When I was finished, the commanding officer jumped up, put his hand on my shoulder, pointed his finger at my nose, and said, I am the most fulfilled person in this battalion, and don't you forget it. So this has a wide application. But I believe it's God's formula for fulfillment is these four words that I've talked about. And I've experienced this since I was 40 years old. So that's given me a great life. Now, just in a little bit, I want us to have some questions, so I'll tell you why. I've tried to figure out what the learning process is. As I ask students if I can get an answer, they generally say, well, it's memorizing what the professor and the textbook says. And when they give me that answer, I say, until after the finals. But I have a theory that I'm pushing pretty hard. The learning process is getting answers to questions that you have a deep interest in. That's simple. Just getting answers to questions that you have. I've known a few really good students. They told me that I always make an appointment with my professors and to go back and get the unanswered questions from what he presents. So they had the curiosity satisfied. That was learning. Now another thing I've learned is that everybody has a different learning sequence than anybody else. If I sit down with a group of a half a dozen students and they start asking questions, one will ask a question, one other will be slightly interested, and the other four couldn't care less until they ask their question. So the learning process is getting answers to questions in which you have a personal interest. There is some hazard to question and answer. And I'll tell you what that is. That I heard about the two men were going to a ball game, and they thought it'd be more sporting if one of them bought both tickets. But instead of flipping a coin, they said, let's ask each other's questions, and the first person that can't answer the other's question buys the tickets. But there's one ground rule, and that is that the person who asks the question has to know the answer. So they started out, and the first one said, how does a rabbit dig a hole without leaving any dirt? And the other man thought of me and said, well, I don't know, but I'm not going to buy the tickets because you don't know either. And he said, yes, I know the answer. You do? What's the answer? He said, the rabbit starts at the bottom. And the other man said, "How'd you get down there?" He said, "That's your question." So you know who bought the tickets. But any question and answers we have here, you don't have to know the answer. That's my primary way of communicating. I like is question and answer. That I could get up here and spend a half hour telling you what I'm interested in, and I might not be on your frequency at all. So if there's just one person that gets on the same frequency and I can answer the question, I feel like I've been a success here. Now, before I do that, let me give just a further word of testimony. As it's been said, I'm 103 years old. Know that when you're young, you're 1.5 or 2.5 and use fractions. When you get to be over 100, you use fractions also. So I'm actually 103 and 5/12 old. In my Christian life, I've tried to figure out what is my job description as a Christian. I think I've finally figured it out, and that is to be a representative of Jesus Christ. It's that simple. If I go down to Staples to buy some supplies for my office, my job isn't to buy supplies. It's to interact with the staff, the salespeople, and the cashier. I have a 3-part vow that I try to keep. I'm not able to do it successfully all the time. But it is, number one, I will not deny Christ by my silence. I travel by air still quite a bit. And I'm sitting next to a person. To get their attention, I generally pull out a Bible and start reading. Of course, they look at that. And if it look hard enough, I generally say, do you ever read the Bible? I sat down with a pro golfer a few months ago, and I said, do you ever read the Bible? He said, no. I said, do you have a Bible? He said, no. I said, if I would give you one as a gift, would you accept it? And he said, no. So that conversation didn't go very far. Another time I was riding between Colorado Springs and Denver, which is the roughest airspace in the U.S. And when I took down and started reading, the man next door said, you must be expecting a pretty rough landing to be reading the Bible in that. But I try not to deny Christ by my silence. I want every person I'm in contact to know that he was sitting along somebody that believed the Bible and has something to say about it. The second thing is, I will not deny Christ by my conduct when I can't get my own way. We were talking about this with some of you at dinner time. I often ask students, what is your underlying philosophy? And I generally find out I don't get much answers to it. And I said, well, let me give you this to try on and see how it fits. Your underlying philosophy is, I want what I want when I want it, get out of my way. Does that fit here? So I try not to deny Christ by my conduct when I don't get my own way. And most of the time I get frustrated is when there's a flight canceled on me, which I don't react very well about, and blame the agent behind the podium that has nothing to do with it. That's a hard time to keep my testimony when I can't get my own way when I want it. The third is that I won't sit on the bench when the coach says, get in the game. I'll tell you a story about that. The game was getting pretty near the end. The home team was ahead. And then their tackle missed a ball carrier, got through and scored. And so the lead in the game went the other way. So the coach was not happy at the player for missing the tackle. So he said, "What happened?" And he said, "Well, I disobeyed everything you taught me. I let down the team. I let you down. I let the fans down. I feel terrible that I made that mistake." And the coach said, "Well, okay." So when his team went back on the field, the coach waved back on. This big tackle just sat there, wouldn't go on the field. And the coach said, "Come on, get back in the game." And he said, "Oh, I don't feel like it." And so the coach said, "Are you sick or something?" He said, "No, I made a big mistake. I've got to punish myself before I go back out." So he wouldn't go back out. So after the game, the coach talked to him, and he said, "I know some psychology. I know some theology. While you're sitting there punishing yourself, there's only one thing happening, and that is that your memory is fading." I've heard that the closest path to a clear conscience is a poor memory. The only thing you can measure that's happening is memory is fading. That's a pretty slim thing to base your theology on, that you're right with God when you don't remember what happened. The problem is that we do something and we have a second thing to think about and remember. So my third part of my vow is I will not deny Christ by sitting on the bench when he says, "Get back in the game," knowing that forgiveness does not depend on the lapse of time. It's instantaneous. Restoration is instantaneous as long as we meet the conditions. So with those thoughts on fulfillment and on my personal vows and what I believe is my job description, do you have questions?